Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at something that's become pretty significant in politics lately, Elon Musk's political contributions and activities.
Yeah, it's a big topic. We've gathered quite a bit of information, different sources digging into where his money's actually going, and importantly, how that spending pattern has, well, changed over time.
Right. And our goal here is really to understand that evolution, the impact of his financial involvement based on what these sources tell us.
Exactly. We're looking at analyses detailing his political giving, federal, state, some local stuff too. And it's not just direct donations like to candidates or parties.
No, it's also the super PACs, other political groups,
Yeah.
that whole side of things.
Which has become huge. The data we're looking at, it covers a pretty wide span right up into the 2024 election cycle, and sometimes even looks a bit beyond that.
So for everyone listening, our mission, let's say, is to cut through all the numbers and data and pull out the key insights. We want to track the shifts in his spending, get a sense of the sheer scale, and think about the implications.
Without getting totally buried in spreadsheets.
Exactly. Okay, so let's dive in. It looks like, going back a bit before maybe 2020 or so, his contributions were more bipartisan. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that seems right. And that's not unusual for, major business figures. Often the strategy early on is to support people on both sides.
Democrats and Republicans.
Right. The idea is usually about getting access, keeping communication lines open, which is, well, pretty important if your companies are in heavily regulated fields.
Like SpaceX and Tesla. Makes sense. Okay, so we have some examples here. On the Democratic side, looks like Obama's reelection.
Reportedly maxed out the contribution there. And Hillary Clinton got support too, like $2,300 back in 2015.
And then the party committees, the DNC, the DSCC for Senate races, DCCC for the House.
Yeah, donations there too. Some were pretty sizable, tens of thousands, around 2010, 2011, and again in the 2018 cycle.
And then specific names, Feinstein, Durbin, Booker, Cantwell, Schiff. Quite a list of individual senators and representatives.
It is quite broad. It wasn't just the top names or the party itself. Giving to individual members across different states. It does suggest a deliberate effort to build those relationships inside the Democratic Party structure.
So the traditional access play, basically, covering bases.
Seems like it. Playing the game, you could say. Hedging bets, making sure you have a seat at the table no matter who's holding the majority.
Okay, and Republicans were getting checks too.
Oh, yeah. George W. Bush, way back in 2004, got a donation. And the NRCC, that's the National Republican Congressional Committee, the House side, they seem to have gotten contributions pretty consistently over many years.
Wow, many years. And there's a big one noted here, over $289,000 in August 2024.
Yeah, that's a significant jump later on. We'll get to that. But the pattern of giving to the NRCC was there earlier, too. Plus, donations to state parties, like in California and Utah.
And again, individual names. Graham, Rubio. Oh, interesting. It says refund next to Rubio.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. Could be exceeding limits, maybe a change of heart, various reasons.
Yep.
But yeah, also Tillis, Cornyn, McCarthy, Rohrabacher. They're on the list.
So consistent giving to the NRCC, that seems noteworthy.
It does. It suggests a steady engagement, at least with the House Republicans, over a long stretch.
We also see some traditional PACs listed. Prairie PAC, Majority Committee PAC, Reclaim America PAC.
Right. Those are more standard political action committees.
So looking at all this early activity, Democrats and Republicans, party committees, individuals, what's the likely driver? You mentioned access.
That's probably the main thing, access and dialogue, especially, like we said, for SpaceX, Tesla, aerospace, cars, energy, lots of regulations, government contracts, potentially. Keeping those channels open with policymakers is just, smart business.
And Musk himself apparently said something like that, defending donations.
Yeah, back in 2018, he mentioned some Republican donations were specifically about maintaining dialogue.
Okay. And it's worth noting here, these earlier contributions, they mostly stayed within the legal limits, right? The hard money limits.
Generally, yes. These are direct contributions to candidates and parties, which have caps on how much you can give. That's a key distinction for what comes later.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about that change. Around the 2020 election cycle, things start to shift.
They do. The sources point to that period as a kind of turning point. You still see some bipartisan giving in 2020, like donations to Reid, Shaheen, Peters on the Dem side, alongside Tillis, Cornyn, Ernst for the GOP.
So not a complete cutoff immediately.
No, more of a tilt first.
Yeah.
But then by the time we get to the 2024 cycle, it's not just a tilt, it's a pretty dramatic shift.
How so? What does that look like in the 2024 data?
Well, the direct federal contributions, that hard money stuff, it becomes minimal. Really small amounts, relatively speaking. Instead, you see these big chunks going to Republican Party committees.
Like that big NRCC donation we mentioned, and the state parties in California and Utah.
Exactly. And to put in perspective, the estimate for his total hard money contributions in the entire 2024 cycle is around $1 million.
Which, okay, is a lot of money for you or me, but in the context of his overall spending.
It's a tiny fraction. It really signals a major change in strategy, moving away from just ensuring access everywhere towards, well, actively backing one side.
We also see corporate PACs mentioned SpaceX PAC, Solar City Inc. PAC.
Right, those are different. They're usually funded by employees, executives, kind of standard corporate political activity. But the real story, the massive change, is in the outside spending.
Ah, okay. This is where Citizens United comes in.
Precisely. That Supreme Court decision from 2010 basically, blew the doors open for unlimited spending by independent groups. Super PACs, other organizations, they can raise and spend as much as they want as long as they don't officially coordinate with the campaigns.
And Musk jumped into this arena big time, particularly with something called America PAC in 2024.
Oh, yeah. America PAC basically became his main vehicle, primarily set up to support Donald Trump and other Republicans.
And the funding, where did it come from?
Overwhelmingly from Musk himself. The sources point to over $239 million just in the 2024 cycle.
Wow. $239 million from one person to one PAC.
It's staggering. There was an initial $5 million contribution logged around July 3rd, 2024, which was around the time he publicly endorsed Trump. And there were even reports, though he disputed the exact figure, about a potential $45 million monthly commitment.
$45 million a month. Good grief. So what did this PAC actually do with all that money?
A lot of get out the vote or GOTV work, canvassing, mailers, digital ads, texts, calls, the ground game stuff. They reportedly spent over $77 million just on boosting Trump and opposing Kamala Harris.
And targeting House races, too.
Yep, significant spending in key House races as well.
There was also something controversial. A giveaway.
Yes, that definitely drew attention. A $1 million a day giveaway promotion. It was linked to signing a petition in swing states,
Right.
supposedly about the First and Second Amendments.
But critics said
Critics pointed out it was also a massive voter data collection effort. And it faced legal challenges, accusations of being basically a lottery advertised improperly.
And there's another payment here, over $40 million to a company called United States of America, Inc. What's that?
That's less clear. It seems to be a recently registered entity, possibly linked to Musk, but the specific purpose of that large payment isn't fully detailed in the sources we have.
Okay, so America PIC was the behemoth, but there was another one late in the game, RBG PIC.
Yes, RBG PIC popped up in late October 2024. And the funding, $20.5 million, came entirely from Musk's revocable trust.
A trust? Interesting. And because of the timing.
Right, because it was funded so late via a trust, his role as the sole backer wasn't actually public knowledge until after the election.
And the name, RBG PIC, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, what was the angle there?
It was.
Yeah.
Specific. The ads drew a comparison between Trump's position on abortion and some past statements by Justice Ginsburg.
How did they do that?
They highlighted Trump saying he opposed a federal abortion ban, and then pulled quotes from Ginsburg where she'd expressed some reservations about the Roe v. Wade decision, suggesting it might have gone too far, too fast for public acceptance back then.
That sounds like a stretch.
It was widely characterized as misleading. I mean, Ginsburg was a consistent defender of abortion rights, and Trump appointed the justices who overturned Roe. So yeah, it was seen as a pretty calculated, maybe cynical tactic to try and sway certain moderate voters, perhaps.
Definitely controversial messaging. Okay, so that's super PACs. So what about these 501c4 groups, the dark money outfits?
Right. These are different because they're organized under a section of the tax code that allows them to engage in political activity, but they don't have to disclose their donors. Hence, dark money.
And Musk has been involved there, too.
Significantly. One big example is Citizens for Sanity.
Okay, what do we know about them?
Well, we know now that Musk gave them over $50 million in the fall of 2022, but that only came out in October 2024.
So he gave $50 million 2 years before anyone knew about it.
Exactly. That's how 501c4s can work. This group is linked to Stephen Miller, America First Legal, and they spend a lot in the 2022 midterms. Reports suggest around $93 million total.
$93 million. And what kind of activities did they fund?
Very provocative ads. Really hit hard on culture war themes, transgender issues, immigration, crime targeting Democrats.
And the tone.
Often described as controversial, even inflammatory. There were accusations of racist and transphobic messaging. Some analysts suggested the aim might have even been to suppress turnout among certain minority groups.
Wow. That lack of donor disclosure really makes it hard to track influence, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. We know Musk was a major donor, maybe the largest, but we don't necessarily know who else might have been funding them.
Okay, another 501c4 mentioned is Building America's Future.
Right. Musk reportedly became a major donor there, too, also in 2022. Their revenue shot way up that year. Some reports suggest his contribution could have been over $100 million, perhaps alongside others.
$100 million to another one of these groups.
Potentially, yes. And this one acted almost like a hub, it seems.
How so?
It passed money along to other groups. It gave a large amount, around $43 million, to Citizens for Sanity, the group we just discussed. It also funded Future Coalition, PASSE, and Stand for U.S. PAC.
And what did Building America's Future do itself?
Ran misleading pro-Trump ads, apparently. There was also this thing called Progress 2028, described as a disinformation campaign trying to mimic progressive groups.
And state-level stuff, too.
Yeah, they got involved in the 2025 Wisconsin Supreme Court race, spending big for the Republican candidate. And interestingly, they even ran ads against some GOP state legislators on drug pricing issues.
That's complex. Okay. Any other big donations we should flag?
Well, there's $10 million reported going to the Senate Leadership Fund, which is a major Republican super PAC. $3 million to MAA Alliance PAC, and that reported $10 million in 2023 to support Ron DeSantis's run.
Right, before the Trump endorsement.
Exactly. Plus, there's issue-specific stuff. Money for a California clean energy ballot measure years ago, funds benefiting House Republicans more recently, and significant spending in Texas on tort reform and judicial races. It's a wide net.
It really is. Okay, let's touch briefly on the state and local contributions. You said tracking this is harder.
Yeah, much harder. Disclosure rules, databases, it's really patchy compared to the federal level.
But we have some info for California.
We do. Back when he seemed more bipartisan, he gave in gubernatorial races Jerry Brown, a Democrat, and Meg Whitman, a Republican, in 2010. Even earlier donations to Schwarzenegger.
And Newsom later.
Yes, Newsom too. Plus that $75,000 for the Clean Energy Initiative, which, aligns with Tesla. And even in 2024, a $10,000 donation to the state Republican Party.
And Texas, where he's moved significant operations.
Texas giving looks more consistently Republican, especially more recently. Contributions to Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick back in 2014, often through his trust. Then these big donations in 2024 are reported $1 million for tort reform efforts. $2 million for judicial PACs.
And Chicago. There's a note about Rahm Emanuel.
Yeah, $50,000 to Mayor Emanuel back in 2015. Kind of an outlier compared to the recent trends, but it's in the record.
So the state and local stuff, it seems to follow business interests, residency maybe, and mirrors the overall shift we've seen federally.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah.
That seems like a fair summary.
Okay, let's try to synthesize all this. What's the big picture profile of his political spending now?
Well, the total amount, based on these sources, is clearly well over $350 million. And the overwhelming majority of that has been spent just since 2022.
So a massive acceleration.
Huge. And the partisan shift is incredibly stark. After around 2022, it becomes almost entirely Republican-focused. The sources estimate over 99% Republican-leaning in the 2024 cycle.
And mostly through
outside spending. Super PACs in these 501c4s, again, something like 99% of his 2024 spending went through those channels, not direct hard money donations.
And the use of personal trust for some big contributions is also notable.
Yes. So the transformation is really from, a fairly conventional wealthy donor giving limited amounts to both sides to a true mega donor operating almost exclusively in the unlimited, often less transparent world of outside spending.
So summing up the key trends and shifts we've identified.
Okay, first, there's that clear chronological pivot from bipartisan to overwhelmingly Republican support, and that lines up pretty well with his public statements and rhetoric.
Right. Second,
the massive shift in method. From direct, limited contributions to this reliance on unlimited outside money via super PACs, and significantly, those non-disclosing 501c.
And that tracks with his public persona, too.
There seemed to be a strong correlation with his increasingly right-leaning public comments and his activities on X, the platform he owns. Though we should remember that contradiction, his March 2024 statement saying he wouldn't donate to either presidential candidate, which clearly changed later.
Good point. What about motivations? Why this shift, this scale?
It's likely a mix. Business interests are almost certainly part of it. Regulations, taxes, unions, government contracts for SpaceX are huge.
Yeah.
But maybe personal grievances, too. That's been suggested.
And just wanting direct influence.
Pursuit of access and influence,
Got it.
definitely. Being co-chair of that DOGE task force under Trump is a pretty concrete example. But underlying it all is just the sheer dramatic increase in the scale of the spending.
He really is a unique case, isn't he? The combination of that level of wealth, owning a major social media platform, and this very direct personal involvement in politics.
He is. And while he's exceptional in scale, his activities really do throw a spotlight on the broader trends in campaign finance post-Citizens United, the growing power of these mega donors.
Right. Okay, so as we wrap this deep dive up, let's distill it one last time for our listeners. What are the absolute key takeaways?
I'd say three things stand out. One, the undeniable, dramatic shift in his political spending, moving heavily towards Republican causes in recent years. Two, the absolutely massive scale of his contributions, especially channeled through super PACs and those opaque dark money 501c groups.
And three.
The significant implications this kind of concentrated financial power has for our political landscape, raising big questions about influence and transparency.
Okay. And on that note, maybe here's a final thought for everyone listening to consider. When you see this level of spending and the methods used, the super PACs, the undisclosed 501c4 money, what does it really tell us about how individual wealth can shape our politics today?
Yeah, what kind of questions should we be asking about transparency, about accountability, when so much influence can be wielded, sometimes quietly, by just a few individuals?
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.